Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to the history track of this conference. Our next session takes its title from a novel set in Moscow in the 1990s and from a study of Russians born about the year 1980. They spent their childhood their idealistic childhoods growing up in the Soviet Union, and then their adolescence in something quite different. To quote one of them, they said, "When we were children, everything was for the future, and then suddenly it wasn't." Now, I spent my childhood immersed in the Eagle comic and other similar educational material, and from my studies, I learned quite a number of things that weren't true. That Britain largely won the Second World War, that my future included casual space travel, flying cars, and that automation and artificial intelligence would usher in an age of abundance and leisure. Later on, I learned Fortran, which happily was true, and, well, it's entirely another story, but at the age of 16, wrote a neural net with 6 nodes in Fortran. Only a few years later, I was introduced to APL, and at that point, I thought that my learning of programming languages was pretty much done, because I'd obviously found the best language. And I didn't plan on doing development or coding in anything else afterwards. And I didn't think that I was that much ahead of the curve. I thought the rest of the world was going to catch up pretty soon, and that certainly only a few decades later, that by the present moment, pretty much everybody would be coding in APL. Well, 10 years after that, 10 years spent very enjoyably mostly, working at IP Sharp Associates, it slowly dawned on me that the world wasn't moving that way. If it had caught up, then it passed me as well, and was obsessed with other things. And I reacted personally with a 15-year sulk in which I didn't do any coding at all. When I came back to it, I discovered that the APL then available on a PC was faster and more elaborate and got more features and gizmos and most particularly more memory than anything I'd ever seen. It seemed at last the ideal environment in which to do the APL programming that I'd always loved, but almost nobody was using it. So in the last 20 years, interest in APL in particular and the array languages has grown. I've been enjoying developing in APL and in KDB. And I've got the privilege this afternoon of interrogating, if you like, 3 of the figures who steered APL through those years of what for me were disappointment and surprise, and kept it alive in the real world. And I'm going to invite to come up onto the stage Pete Donnelly.
Thank you.
Pete, this is a real privilege to winkle you out of Greece.
Thank you.
And I most enjoyed your presentation earlier today. Yeah, very much ahead of the curve, I think, and preserving APL's ability to deliver a GUI interface for us from a solo developer.
I hope so, yes.
But I'd like to take you back, or as if I were a hypnotist, back to the years before you discovered APL. What had happened? Go back as far as you like, but what had happened before you found APL?
Gosh. I was employed at W.H. Smith at the time. I don't know if W.H. Smith means anything to you. They have kiosks in airports. And I was in the operational research department there, and I was tasked with writing a budgeting system or financial modelling system for the wholesale division, which I started writing in Fortran along with a colleague called John Ward, who later joined STSC. And we started writing this in Fortran, and we beavered away for a few weeks, months. And then we had something came through from W.S. Atkins saying, we've got this time-sharing service with APL, Xerox APL. So we went and tried it, and within a day or two, we'd written more than we'd written in the Fortran system that we'd been working on. So we started writing that in APL, and that was it. We were both hooked. That's how it started.
You were hooked on the language. So you were hooked on the language.
I was hooked on the language. The thing that attracted me to APL, honestly, genuinely, was that I was able to do my job at W.H. Smith working 3 or 4 hours a week using APL and spend the rest of the week playing golf.
And did you have expectations at that time as to...
No, we just thought this was a pretty cool language. And both John and I became very interested in working with it. And we just carried on doing that at W.H. Smith. Shall I carry on with the rest of the story?
What sort of work were you doing with APL?
We were doing a financial modelling type work with APL. Pretty well nothing else, actually. We did try a bit of scheduling of delivery scheduling and so on, but that wasn't particularly successful, not because of APL, but because we weren't very good at it. Then the guys at W.S. Atkins formed a group which they set up called Dyalog Systems. Ted Hare, Dave Crossley, and Phil Gosher. And then Ted Hare used to visit us because he was selling the APL service. And he eventually pulled me to one side and said, would you like to join us? Which I did. That was in 1982, thereabouts. And then I worked as a consultant at Dyalog, working for various clients. I started with Rank Xerox, I think it was. I went to Beecham's, I went to British Airways, I went to all sorts of places, and wrote APL application systems for them. Shall I carry on?
And then what happened?
Then what happened was a lady called Pam Geisler, who was working who was a senior, I think, director of Dyalog UK, got together with Ted Hare, and they decided to develop an APL for Unix, which came out as Dyalog APL. It was a combination of dy for dyadic and log for Zilog. That's where Dyalog comes from. This was a really stupid idea because at that time there was no market for Unix. It was zero. But Pam Geisler was a very good persuader, and she persuaded Ted Hare and the other directors of Dyadic at the time to invest in it. They recruited John Scholes, who had been part of the group at W.S. Atkins, and he and Geoff Streeter, under the guidance of David Crossley, developed the original version of Dyalog APL, which I first saw, I think it was 1983 or 4, I can't remember exactly. And there was something in John Daintrey's presentation this morning about limits in the interpreter. Excuse me, Geoff, if I recall this for you. Geoff and John invited the rest of the members of Dyadic to see what they'd done. And we were all gathered around the terminal, and suddenly the whole thing crashed. Everything went fut. And we looked at the thing, and Geoff's son had sat on the keyboard. And he had hit the 255 or maybe even fewer character limit on how many characters you could have in a line. And so the thing crashed. So the very first demonstration of Dyalog APL was rather disappointing, shall we say.
Well, you mentioned Geoff joining you at Dyadic at that time. We were hearing from Geoff just at the end of the last session, but I'm going to ask Gitte Christensen to come up at this point. We'll hear from Geoff in a little bit.
Hello.
Welcome.
Do I
Please.
sit here or do
Yeah.
we switch?
No, go right there.
Okay.
In the TV chat shows, they always move the camera so you don't actually see people shuffling
Right,
up.
okay, so I was
'cause
fooled there.
We're too dignified for that.
Yep.
Gitte, you've led Dyalog for some years, but could you tell us about your early years before APL found you and what you thought about it when it did?
Yeah, well, I was graduating as a biologist back in the early 80s, and we'd done some data analysis and statistics and manipulation, mainly using a Texas 56A pocket calculator that was programmable and had 2K memory, and some donated cycles on a mainframe that somebody else hadn't used up to do multivariate analysis. So I had a little bit of experience with computers, personal and big ones. Getting a job as a biologist back then, and especially environmentalist, we were the first bunch that came out as environmental biologists. There were no jobs. So I went and took the pedagogical course to be able to teach at high schools, but alas, having only biology and scheduling was done by hand back then, you would have had to have geography or gymnastics or something like that in addition to get a job. And by the way, trying to teach, I thought that maybe 10 times 3 years curriculum was not exactly how I planned to spend my life. So one day I saw in the newspaper an ad that long-term unemployed academics could be retrained to EDP. That was IT back then, EDP, electronic data processing.
So this was Denmark leading the world in recycling.
Yes. So I took that course, and there was about 30 of us, and they taught us first 7 weeks of Fortran, and I was a pretty good hack at that, but I had the hardest time getting the result out of the machine because you had to predict how big the result was for it to write it. And I mean, how weird is that? So we also had some, COBOL, like 30 lines of declarations before you could even start thinking about the logic. Then we had something that was data analysis that was a precursor of, because the relational data model had just been published and there were all sorts of systems to analyze data and stuff. So that was quite interesting. And then some finance for running a company, and then the last 3 weeks, lo and behold, was APL. And the first day, the first statement he showed was 1, 2, 3 plus 4, 5, 6. And it just wrote out 3 numbers. And I looked at it and said, no declarations, no loops. And it just prints out the result without you having to tell them anything. So I was just thinking, man, if I'd had that while I was studying, how much more could we not have done? And so I was completely excited. And fortunately, there was 2 different apprenticeships that you could get with companies who said they were also interested in hiring people afterwards. They had also arranged for the rest of the guys to go places. So I ended up with IP Sharp, and I never looked back. I mean, it was just so much fun. The first thing I did was an international financial consolidation system based on Magic, which is like a time series database template that IP Sharp had. And that just worked. Well, the first program was about 1 meter long, and wasn't exactly very structured, and I got a peer review on it and got an email. Well, we had also international email at IP Sharp back then. So I got an email that was just as long as the program, with a lot of comments that I didn't understand. But like 3 months later, they wanted some additions to the system. And I started to realize what the guy was on about, because getting to this point, I wasn't really sure whether that variable had been set or not. And then maybe I'd better set it again, and stuff like that. So I rewrote the program, sort of refactored it, based on the knowledge and the good. That was Örjan Wikström. I don't know if any of you remember him. It was a very long time ago. So anyways, yeah, it's no secret that Morten also sent me unsolicited emails then, and it ended up that he came down to Denmark. So we did quite a few systems. We've even wrote our own database system to deal with clinical trials at Novo Nordic. It's quite a lot of data, so a relational database was not ideally suited, so we used VSAM files. And yeah, they were really, really happy with that. And we made quite a few systems on MAPRA, which was the relational database implementation from IP Sharp and later Viewpoint. And so we did customer applications until IP Sharp got bought by Reuters, and then they bought a lot of data, right? Because IP Sharp had collected data, time series from all sorts of markets, stock markets, currency, commodities, and Reuters had started out as a business sending information from Paris to London via doves. And obviously, once the information had reached London or going the other way, the information was in people's heads and were lost. And so when they started going on computers, they did the same thing. They just sent the message with the new ticker marks and prices and lost it. So suddenly when people started getting PCs and wanted to do analysis on modeling on old data, they didn't have any data. So they bought IP Sharp for all the data we had been collecting over the years. And they didn't discover that they also got a software business, so they sort of just spat that out again. So we lost our job in Copenhagen and started a small consultant company where we did stuff for the customers we already had. And then at some point, we had 3 big projects and were hiring more people because we were going to be very busy. And one company got bored, didn't have time for us. One company was supposed to go public, didn't have time for us. And at the third company, a new boss who wanted this system didn't know that he had to apply for the data a quarter ahead of time. So suddenly we had nothing to do. And then we did SQAPL because Romilly Cocking had told us about this fantastic company, Technosis, that had made a Lego block system of APIs from desktops like Mac and Windows and Unix workstations over any network to any main and mid-frame to any database system. And one of the things we had noticed was that, yes, the PC, as you said, was a wonderful place to do APL, but you couldn't get at the data. So SQAPL was born out of boredom, you could say, and we traveled with that for 10, 15 years, and even today, most of our customers are dependent on SQAPL as a good way of accessing corporate data. And then, because of that, we got bought by Datum, because they wanted a client-server system. And because of SQAPL, they thought we could do that. But the first thing Morten did was actually rewriting their Windows system so that it looked like a Windows system and not a DOS system. But that one actually, yes, you did. Okay. But anyways, that one sort of upped and got bought again, and we were again inside systems. And then at some point, another opportunity presented itself. We got a little bit of money out of that, a datum exit, and Pete was talking more and more about playing golf full time.
That was my plan at that time, to play golf. I was going to turn pro.
Yep.
Let me pause you in the story there, where you're busy and happy making tools out of APL for years, and ask Geoff to come back on the stage, because I want to pick up the story of Dyadic Systems again.
Ooh, right. I shall pinch this one.
Absolutely. Geoff would like you all to notice that he's sitting on the extreme left, which is a political choice.
Goes with the politics, yeah.
Geoff and Pete, at this point you'd founding Dyadic Systems to produce APL, and people often casually will offer advice in the form of, yeah, but don't bet your house on it. But some of you did bet your houses. What were you expecting?
Okay, we've only got 10 minutes on this. This could take me hours. You're asking me to describe my lifetime in 10 minutes. What happened was, when Dyalog was released at a conference in 1983 in Washington, it was an immediate failure. It was a disaster. We sold one license in the first year, and commercially it had no chance whatsoever. And the company failed at that point. Linwood bought the company up. I was appointed general manager because I had some contact already with Linwood. And they invested further in the development of Dyalog APL from 1984 till about 1990. And by then they were losing patience because it still hadn't made any money. And John Scholes, myself, and Pauline Brand decided that we actually thought we could make a success out of it. So we bought the company from Linwood at that point. This was 1990. And we didn't end up making a success of it, but we had quite a torturous time on the way. How much detail do you want me to go into?
Well, Geoff was mentioning earlier that there are copies around of the 25th anniversary celebration, which has got much of this history in. And he's quite right. It's online, I think, in the BAA's Vector archive.
The Vector archive, yeah.
So people can go and find this detail. I was wondering more at a personal level, what you saw as the possibility that some houses got actually bet on the business.
Well, at that time, Unix had started to become a bit more popular. When we started, Unix was hopeless. Well, there wasn't a market for it. And John, myself, and Pauline could see a future. And we believed that we would be able to develop Dyalog and actually make money out of it. And we did, slowly improve the financial situation of the company. I spent all my time worrying about whether I could pay Geoff's salary, which was, it wasn't enormous, but it was. We had to get some income to pay not just Geoff's salary, but in the rest of the company.
Did you worry about this, Geoff?
Sorry?
Did you worry about this too?
I'm not a worrier. I abdicate that to the management.
Wise man.
Yeah, so anyway, we set out with the hope that we would succeed, and we ended up succeeding. We had quite a few problems on the way, but we managed to overcome them. In 1991 or 92, 90, I can't remember, John Daintree joined us. 91, which gave a huge boost to the company. I can't stress how much of a boost that did give us. But even then, we found sort of what happened was we started to develop customers like we had British Airways became a Dyalog user in a small way. They needed to buy some hardware to run it on. We ended up selling them the hardware, and then we ended up selling IBM computers. And in the year 2000, we sold £10 million worth of IBM computers. And we did the same in 2000. It was the year 2000 joke, BA had to replace all their computers, so they bought them from us. And we started off selling them a couple of units to run APL, and we ended up being their sole supplier of Unix systems, which was crazy. So the company, became really difficult to run. We were trying to make a success of the APL business. At the same time, we had already made a success by accident out of flogging IBM hardware. But I don't want to go too much into that detail. It's not got a lot to do with APL, and we've got 5 minutes left.
So for some part of this time, APL was only a small part of the business.
At that time, commercially speaking, it was, but in terms of commitment, both in terms of management and the staff commitment, we were very much an APL company still.
And how did
Andy ought to join in the discussion because he would have a very I don't know if there's time. I should mention that Andy Shiers joined us as an APL guy, but then became really the number 2 person in the company who was handling the support of Unix systems in general.
Well, what I'm, I guess, angling for here is what you thought the business was about at that time, what business you're in, and how that idea has changed over the years, how your idea of the future has evolved.
I think it's fairly safe to say that for those of us who are selling the IBM hardware, Karen and myself in particular, we viewed selling IBM hardware as something that allowed Dyadic to continue so that Dyalog APL could continue. Okay, some of my team really didn't understand APL, but I think it's fair to say that Pauline on occasion did get a bit cross with Karen and me because we were more interested in APL than we ever were in. Sorry, selling boxes is great. Selling boxes to people you like is great. Mucking about with APL all the time is infinitely more fun. And that was it. It was very much it's a pragmatic. We could sell hardware to various companies. We were good at it. We got a very good reputation in the IBM world, and it allowed us to carry on doing APL when we could.
For which we're very grateful. Gitte, how did your idea of what business you're in evolve over time?
Well, it's changed obviously because it started with a language provider, and then became a consultancy. And then at the stint at Datum, we were actually selling software applications. And I mean, a smart application written in APL married to really good marketing. I mean, that's a world beater. And it was. And that's what we saw when we first got together with them, that the way they approached marketing and selling was something we really could use, and we could supply them with the product needed to do that. So that's one learning, but unfortunately, selling programming languages that way is not going to work, except Mark Wolfson claims he was going to do it in the US, so we are looking forward to that. Okay, so basically, I would say what we have been trying to do is to be extremely loyal to our customers and service them well, and try to predict the next future. So we're not putting the future behind us, except the one that's already passed. But we are trying to identify the next future and focus on that to make sure that our customers will have their needs met when they get to it. Sometimes it's quite lonely to be out there with these things, and people think, what are they talking about? And then one day, suddenly the IT department sits there drumming, and they say, oh, wasn't there something at the user meeting about this new thing? We went to a meeting with a prospect customer once, and they said to us sort of solemnly, there's just been made a strategic decision that all new systems can only be SAP and .NET. Oh yes, we have interface to .NET, so we can do that. Could you explain to us what this .NET thing is? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, the rest of that and the way you and Morten have guided and steered Dyalog into the present is more familiar history. So I'm going to let go of my privileges at the moment and invite questions from the floor.
So, as the next generation, is there anything we should take with us into the new future?
Yes, keep the eye on the ball and not on the scoreboard.
Could you specify the ball, please?
The ball is your customers,
Yes,
your users.
absolutely.
Customers, check.
Actually, Stina kind of preempted my question a bit. I wanted to ask, I was having an interesting discussion with Mark here about problems made in the past that we've had. And the new generation is coming in, we have a lot of ideas, but we don't want to recapitulate the same mistakes that were made, the same ideas, the same, way of thinking about APL. So what are some of the big mistakes that you think that we need to just know about and then not and move past?
But you do. Repeat.
History
No,
is
I mean,
going to repeat itself.
the IT world is a funny thing because new technologies come around and do exactly the same as the old one did. And all focus is putting on switching from one technology to another to the detriment of the user's work, and sometimes even delivering worse systems than they had before that. And it's a very religious community because soon as something new comes around, everybody believes in it, and it must be. And I mean, particularly at the management levels, they have no clue what it's about, but they just think everybody else has this new thing, and I must have it too.
I mean, I can remember when I first started, Pauline said, so we're going into another round of decentralizing computing.
Yeah, and now we are
we'll
going
go back
into...
In my time, I've probably been around that loop, 3-4
Yeah,
times?
but the cloud thing is going back to the mainframes. I mean, yeah, but it is. So, I mean...
Don't forget your past, because there will be things in your past that will make your future much easier.
That's one thing where these stories really help in contextualizing. We can reflect our own beliefs about where APL needs to go and how to connect with the other communities.
APL is there when you want to deal with data, when you want to see your data, when you want to feel your data, when you want to analyze your data. All that other stuff, collecting data, watering networks, putting security walls up, if they could just let it get at the data and get the knowledge from the data that's hidden there. But it's still not there, and they still keep hiding it and keeping it, and
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So you've emphasized, I think, pretty correctly that you're providing an important service to the customers, but you've highlighted two ways in which you take care of your customers, and one of which is obviously responding to the needs that they communicate, but another that you've emphasized is the idea that you are ready sort of ahead of time for the needs that you know the customers are going to have, or something like this, and you're sort of predicting a little bit. And at the same time, sometimes the future can appear in conflict with the present, and understanding there seems to be a balance that you have between responding to what people think they need now and what you perceive they might need in the future, and how do you see balancing the potential future needs of the customers with the apparent needs of the present?
Well, I think, what we have been in the habit of doing is is preparing for these things that we see emerging, and at the point in time where we see which one of them really catch on, we do the hard work to make something available for the customer. But we have made mistakes too, like Silverlight. Suddenly we were almost there with a version, and Microsoft just cut.
Yeah. Do you think that APL can serve any role as a sort of, instead of just making sure you're ready for whatever technology comes out, sort of shaping and controlling what is the next big thing?
No, I don't think so.
Maybe as a thought leader, say.
Because we are very rational people in the APL community, and those religious beliefs are not really.
Right. Thanks.
I think from a Dyalog point of view, one of the things we have got right is we've managed to not provide a total revolution. We've dragged the customers along at their own pace as we've introduced new things. To some extent, that's been a bit of a problem because there's still people using 32-bit and there's still people using classic. But we have sort of taken them along at a pace. And whereas I contrast that with Arthur Whitney, who tends to come out with a new version and say, oh, the old version's dead. you just go from now. They don't completely ignores it. And we've managed to carry the customers with us as we've done the development. And we did quite a lot of work, mainly my work, doing reading old component files, reading old workspaces, and such like. In fact, we could have gone for old workspaces back before version 11, but at some stage around about when we were doing 17, they sort of said, we're not going to read old workspaces beyond 11 anymore because we can't test the code to do that. They couldn't write the QAs. But in practice, that code was there and it was stable. They could have just left it. So, but on the other hand, we haven't been pushed that hard. There are people with workspaces older than that, and we just helped them by using staged versions in order to bring them in. But the actual code works. It's just whether you could read the workspaces or the component files. So I think being able to live with the history has been one of the successes of Dyalog.
Revolutionaries everywhere, take note. Please join me in thanking our distinguished guests for bringing APL into the present.